I'm going to talk about some conceptual and methodological work we're doing that picks up on some of the points Nikki made around uncertainty and risk. Now, to understand why we're thinking about social risk, I mean, it might seem obvious, but the particular focus now on social risk has arisen from the fairly clear direction from government that the level of investment in RRAP should be delivering things that can be used sooner rather than later. So where we originally designed the program as a 10-year R&D program that would hand potential interventions over to managers, we're now considering what can be deployed earlier at low risk. Now, bear in mind two things. One, that no large-scale field trials have been approved. So everyone can be confident we're not going to leave here, run out and start throwing things off the side of boats. Also bear in mind that I am well aware and have talked myself blue saying what all of the social scientists and practitioners here understand, which is that we've been intervening from day one by going out and talking about this stuff. Okay, so in another version of this presentation, I pose for our colleagues in other parts of RRAP, well, what is social risk? And then a big dramatic slide reveals the word everything. I think I took that out this time. I did. Okay. So a little bit about risk. This model, the stakeholder engagement escalator, don't get involved in the detail. It makes two key points. There's a lot of risks that we understand pretty well and which we have great systems to regulate and which are basically pretty straightforward. We know how likely they are, we know what happens when they're realised, and we can set up systems and appoint people to deal with them. So this is your occupational health and safety, your motor vehicle insurance, all this kind of stuff. So often, you know, significant consequences, but what's the critical feature of these is that we can routinise the management of them. But as things get more complex, and particularly as we start to introduce uncertainty, we can't just hand over to, you know, our departmental OH&S person, or we can't just defer to our insurance company. We start to need to bring more people into the tent to make informed decisions about risk management. Then when we start to layer what in this model is called moral and interpretive ambiguity, in other words, things that people will fundamentally apprehend in different ways and come to different moral conclusions in relation to, we need to start getting participatory. I mean, these are social decisions, not things that are easily delegated to either a group of experts or to a technical specialist. And what we're talking about in relation to fundamentally shifting that management paradigm evokes issues of uncertainty and ambiguity. So from the social science team, in trying to think about how do we deal with social risk, we think it's not just a matter of defining the risk, but it's a matter of developing risk governance processes that are appropriately multidisciplinary in the first instance and appropriately deliberative or participatory in the second instance. If you dig into the literature to try and figure out what a social risk is, you find many definitions and some really useful papers written for the resources sector, which seek to differentiate social risk in terms of threats to individuals or communities from business risks, which are threats to the people running the projects. Now, we don't want to take sides in those sorts of debates. We think that's all important. Biocultural risk has been championed by the Reef Trust Partnership's Traditional Owner Technical Working Group. They've picked up on the idea inherent in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People on biocultural values, is that intersection of biological, linguistic and cultural diversity, and said that threats to this diversity also need appropriate consideration and probably a different kind of approach to governance. In some of the literature, social vulnerability comes up, looking at who may be more or less disadvantaged by decisions. And risk perception. Risk perception is really important, not because, I don't know, this is a sympathetic audience, so I don't need to lecture you about the importance of people's understanding of risk fundamentally and materially changing the risk. Not because people could be wrong, but because numbers aren't destiny, because the way we act, the way we respond and act changes the possibility that something might happen and changes the consequences. So there is no great ontological difference between perception and material reality. They're the same thing. So start to do some thinking. Thank you to Bruce for this. This is why you always need a human geographer on the team. The other reason is you can make jokes about modelling and coloured pencils, but the more important reason is that it is important to figure out how these things relate to each other. So we're doing some thinking on how these different aspects of social risk fit together, how the importance, I think the most important part of this model so far is ensuring that we work on ensuring that our responses, we don't just consider the risk of inherent in environmental hazards, but we also consider what might happen as a result of our responses. There's a temptation amongst some people to say, well, the community just has to understand that if we don't do this, everything's going to hell in a handbasket anyway. Not an appropriate or constructive way to deal with it, and not an appropriate way to apprehend risk. So that is it for now. This is because RRAP has been changing. This sort of thinking is then influencing activities which we had already planned, including, in my segue over to Tori, how we deal with the social, economic and cultural impacts of intervention.